It's the Church of Jesus Christ.
So moral relativism, often framed as compassionate. Don't judge, be nice. Why is it framed this way, and why is it so effective?
I think part of it is that we live, and people have said this often, in such a therapeutic culture. And so to contradict someone, to make some sort of a judgment about decisions they're making, I think for some people cuts at the very heart of their identity. And it's immensely painful. And so something that might not have bothered someone at an earlier time is immensely painful, and so it's seen as unloving and wrong to do.
Yeah, Lauren, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely living in the consequences of letting everyone kind of do what they want. We see that with, what's being taught in our schools. We see that with boys in girls' sports. I mean, we're living through the consequences, certainly. I do think in our words and phrases that we use, we still put forward that attitude. I think of you do you, or live your truth, or even to each his own. And so I think that comes from a place of we may have our belief, and we would maybe even like the other person to agree with us, but it's uncomfortable to say what you believe, and that comes from that polarization and the demonization in different camps of worldview and politics and what have you. But I do think that the repercussions that we're living in still allow for young people to be completely confused about what is moral and what is not. But then you do something that's even slightly Judeo-Christian or right-leaning, and you're canceled. So how is that moral relativism where all things are okay and all things are accepted?
Yeah.
When I look at the world today, I feel like moral relativism is largely dead at the level of the culture, because you don't have this overarching, just be nice, there's no truth. Really what you have is the result of that, right? If you tell everybody, believe what you want, be nice about it. Well, 20 years later, they did half, right? They did the believe what they want half, and they just dropped the be nice about it half. And you have a society of people who are convicted about ideas on all different ways. So you have like this, it's weird in the sense you've lost the embrace of relativism, but you have the consequences of it in this massively divided culture with all kinds of different viewpoints and everything else. And the reality was that just be nice about it was never going to work, because that piece of it was not relativistic.
So certainly living in the ramifications. But I appreciate what you said, Tim. I think it was D.A. Carson in his book, The Gagging of God, actually predicted the demise of postmodernism and moral relativism, because, to your point, just that's the fallen humanity can't exist in this. Everybody just believe whatever you want to believe. Everybody just get along. Eventually, there will be a new truth, a new standard that rises to the top. So let's move to justice. So, I mean, we've heard, this is a human instinct to cry out for justice, but we've seen the rise of the social justice movement. We saw a lot of it in the protests and the riots of 2020. We're certainly seeing it now in places like Minneapolis. They're doing it in the name of justice, but they're protesting against the ICE agents and authorities. What happens to justice? The idea of its pursuit, the idea of it actually sticking in a society that doesn't have an absolute standard, an absolute law, an absolute sense of truth. What happens to those cries for justice and the pursuit of making things right?
Well, I think if you were to really unwind it completely into a truly moral, which I don't know that any society has ever done it, because it would be just such chaos that it would pretty quickly be taken over by somebody else, frankly. I mean, it doesn't work. But the more, in all of the places where you try to take moral absolutes away, you're going to end up putting injustice in their place. And so that's, I think, a lot of what we started seeing in the world. And that's why I think when you talk about Me Too, you talk about cancel culture, I mean, you could say hell is making a comeback, in the sense that there was this world that was like, oh, come on, hell's really mean, there shouldn't be, and nobody should really get hurt like that. How could anything be that bad? then the society gets bad enough where you've got people and they're not saying, really in a religious sense, go to hell. But that's kind of what they're saying. Somebody needs to stop you. Somebody needs to end this. I think coming out of that relativism, you've got people realizing there needs to be a judge. There's got to be justice here. But then it's chaotically applied. So you're picking random areas, and these folks in this way get completely canceled, and other folks were still wink, wink, nod, nodding. And then we stop paying attention to this, and Me Too shifts over to something else and shifts over to something else. But I do think you have this interesting way in which the attempt to say, can't we all just get along, is now converting into this angry, like, we need justice here, and turning into this combating in the street between the people that are like, we want absolute, immigration laws followed absolutely, and people who are saying immigration laws are all evil and we're going to fight against them, and we're going to actually have, effectively civil warfare between people who are citizens, legal citizens, over the competing claims of this is what justice is.
And there's no standard or ability to really converse about it, right? Because
Absolutely
you have two polar opposite views, and there's no common standard by which to judge it and discuss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Lauren, to that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where obviously I think my opinion is correct. That's why I believe it.
Right.
But if your opinion is driven just from emotion, my emotions change every day, sometimes every hour. And so there's just no way that you can have some type of absolute truth or grounding point for an entire
there's no basis
or country.
No basis, no standard for justice and evil.
Yeah, and you see that what's happening in Minneapolis. You see that in other protests around the country where because I think this is wrong, I have the absolute authority to go out and do whatever it takes to stop it.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? First of all, it may not be absolutely wrong. It may be correct. And two, you don't have the authority to go out and do vigilante justice or social justice. And at the end of the day, I think that's why a one moral truth, a biblical justice, is what society needs to fall back to.
So to wrap up this conversation, in a world that is suspicious, they're skeptical about the church. They're skeptical of any church or denomination that says there is an absolute moral authority. How do we show them that biblical truth is not oppressive, but it actually leads, and it's the only way that it leads to freedom, and it has served as the foundation for human rights, dignity, and justice for thousands of years?
We are supposed to believe we've got the truth and we know what the real moral absolutes are, but you're in a world where everybody is making those claims, right? And so as a body, we're supposed to be making those same kinds of claims, but we aren't supposed to be making them in that same exact way. But I think it can get really easy to have people, I remember talking to a leader in a denomination saying the biggest issue that he has in the denomination right now is pastors of small churches who sit on Twitter and are just trying to own other people on Twitter like everybody else is doing. And so they're bringing Christian truth, probably, I'll give them the credit, in a way that has fully adopted the methods of the outside world that are so destructive and ugly. We can actually be calm and comfortable with that and let people who are in the darkness come to us and talk for a while before we start responding.
Yeah. Thank you once again for joining me in this important conversation, talking about the implications of moral relativism, but also offering real hope.